Americans seem to encounter a lot of obstacles when looking for their Welsh ancestors. In fact, a lot of people struggle with it, even after doing successful research in other places. And I think the root of the problem is that the cultural assumptions that make certain genealogical methods work in other places don't work when you get to Wales. But don't worry, because today I'm going to break down this problem and give you a solution. Welcome to GenealCymru. My name is Di, and let's use an example to explain what I mean when I say cultural assumptions. I recently read a really excellent article by American genealogist Elizabeth Shown Mills. I really recommend it, so I've linked to her website in the description. In the article, she's trying to identify the father of one of her Texan ancestors, Ferdinand Ball, and there's two methods she uses that stand out to me. One of the first methods she used is she developed extensive contacts with other researchers known to be tracing the surname Ball. And the other method she used is she identified potential fathers by searching for every man with the surname Ball in her area prior to the late 1800s. The cultural assumptions that make these methods useful are as follows. 1. People with the same surname tend to share ancestry. 2. The way that surnames are distributed throughout the population makes a surname study a manageable project. And 3. A father will have the same surname as his son. These are three assumptions that a lot of researchers come into their research with, and I see them get in people's way a lot because they really don't translate well into Welsh research. So let's jump straight into a page from your typical Welsh census. There's 6 different families here, a total of 23 people, and 19 of them have the surname Davis. And then there's 3 Joneses and 1 Williams. And look at the 3 heads of household: David Davis, age 40, David Davis, age 44, and David Davis, age 41. And here's a Welsh marriage record, one of my favorites. In 1853, John Jones, son of John Jones, married Jane Jones, daughter of John Jones, and it was witnessed by John Jones. The commonness of names on these records is not an exception. This is the rule. In fact, if we take the year 1853, 55% of the population had one of only 10 surnames, and 90% of the population had one of fewer than 100 surnames. So there really isn't a lot of diversity in the surnames that you find in Wales. And if you were looking for a potential father for your Jones or Davis ancestor and decided to research every possible man with that surname in your area, like Elizabeth Shown Mills did with the surname Ball, you would be researching a whole lot of people. It's just not reasonable. The other thing is that even though different households have the same surname, it doesn't mean that they're related. In Wales, shared surname doesn't mean shared ancestry. And that's because of how surnames developed in Wales, which I cover in some of my other videos. So if you were to start contacting other researchers working on the same surname, you'll find that in most cases they're working on people who are in no way related to you. And in any case, if you're looking at most Welsh families prior to 1800 and even as late as the 1850s, you'll find that people aren't even using hereditary surnames that pass down generation after generation. So you might see something like Robert Griffith being the father of John Robert, who in turn was the father of Elizabeth Jones. Surnames, as we generally think of them today, weren't the standard across all of Wales until the late 19th century. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that Elizabeth Shown Mills' methods are bad. It's just that they're really good methods for researching in the United States and really bad methods for researching in Wales. And when people use them for Welsh research, they quickly realize that their ancestor's surname is incredibly common, and then they give up and decide that it's impossible to research them. I see it all the time, especially from people with Jones ancestors. But the thing is that you can research them. I do it all the time. You just can't generally use surname-focused research methods in Wales and expect them to work. So here's a Welsh method that does work. You need to forget surnames for a bit and shift your focus to place. In Welsh genealogy, when you look across the different kinds of records, place is almost always one of the categories included. And here's what I mean by place. My 4 times great-grandmother was known as Anne Williams of Clwyd in Llanddewi Brefi. Clwyd was the name of her farm, and Llanddewi Brefi was the name of the parish that her farm was in. In Wales, farms and houses traditionally had names. And you'll find that some of those names stretch back hundreds of years, being used generation after generation to identify the family living there. If we go back to the census record we looked at before, you have a number of farms listed: Gelli Gaer, Cwm Coe, Blaen Cwm Coe, Artvee, Llandewi, Gwarfynon, and the people who lived there will be referred to like this: David Davis of Gelli Gaer, John Jones of Gwarfynon, or Sarah Williams, servant at Llandewi, all in the parish of Cellan. If your ancestors lived in an urban area, you'll have street addresses that work in the same way, alongside the name of the parish. So when my 3 times great-grandfather, Arthur Bellew, was fined for not having a license for his dog, he was referred to in the Swansea Journal as Arthur Bellew, 50 Rodney Street. When you really look at the records, you'll find the same places listed on the census, as you'll find on a birth record, as you'll find on a baptism record, as you'll find on a marriage record, as you'll find on a death record, as you'll find on a burial record, as you'll find on a tombstone, as you'll find on a will, as you'll find in the newspapers and in the journals. The records we have available for Welsh research are incredibly consistent when it comes to place. And that's because place, even more so than name, is the most important identifier in the Welsh records. Doing place-focused research works because it's one of the actual ways that Welsh people have identified each other in their everyday lives all throughout history. Let's look back to 1902, when a T.E. Morris wrote an article for the Honourable Society of Cymru bemoaning the fact that there was such a lack of diversity in Welsh names. He wrote the following: "Take the Welsh Land Commission, for instance. It was often well-nigh impossible to differentiate the witnesses by their names. His name was useless, and although he was familiarly known to his neighbors by his name, linked to that of his farm or holding, it was no easy task for the commissioners." While T.E. Morris viewed this as a problem, what he described so simply is part of the Welsh culture of names and identity. Identifying between individuals of the same name isn't a problem if all of their names are linked to the place where they lived, so naturally that's what people did. While you'll see farm names and addresses on most of the records you encounter, you generally don't want to include them in your search terms on the big genealogy websites. The reason for this is that they tend not to be included in the index, so they're not even searchable, or they're wildly misspelled by the indexers, who very rarely seem to have a good handle of the Welsh language. So this is where the name of the parish comes in. If you wanted to find my ancestor Anne Williams of Clwyd in the records, you'd search under the parish of Llanddewi Brefi. All of the most important record sets are organized and searchable by parish, and that's because things like baptisms, marriages, and burials were created in the parish by the clerk at the local Anglican church. And while many parishes were populous enough that the census enumerator needed multiple booklets to record everyone, on the big genealogy websites they're almost always organized by parish. So it's critically important that you know what parish your ancestors lived in, and if you need help figuring it out, there are free websites like ArtUK that can help you do that. When you're making searches in other places, like the National Library of Wales website, other archive services in Wales, or if you're searching documents where you can search for any word in the body of the document, so think Google or the Internet Archive, that's where you want to use your ancestor's farm name or address. Most of the time there's also going to be different spelling variations, so make sure that you're being creative with the spellings that you use. But you can also get around some of these tricky spelling variations by also making searches with just your ancestor's name and the name of their parish. And that's how you properly identify your ancestors in the Welsh records, by their full name, by their farm or street address, and by their parish. One last thing I want to mention is that there will be communities that this method just doesn't work well for. For example, this method won't be useful if you're researching someone who was homeless. It also might not work well if you're researching traveler or Roma people. And it means that if your ancestors were migrating or moving around a lot, they become a bit more difficult to research. But there are always other useful methods to combine with this one that I'll cover in future videos. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are there any other struggles that you have when getting into Welsh family history research? And if you want to learn more about how to deal with your ancestors who had really common names, why not check out this other video?